All right, let's see if we can do this. This is a version of a speech to teach that I just did for my Com 101 class, and it was kind of a disaster. Was you ever bit by a dead bee? The 1944 Howard Hawks film To Have and Have Not features a drunken boat hand by the name of Eddie who asks nearly everyone he encounters, was you ever bit by a dead bee? And I think that kind of encapsulates a lot about where the media was in 1944 about bees and bee science, and obviously attitudes have changed in the intervening years. So around 2009, Google Trends note a spike for queries for Save the Bees, and you can hardly drive around town without seeing a Save the Bees bumper sticker, or a little later in the spring you'll hear quite a lot on social media about No Mo May and similar efforts to save the bees. So Eddie has some interesting observations about bees. He noted that they were a hazard. If you were to walk around barefoot, you might be stung. And at one point, Lauren Bacall's character is the only character who interacts with Eddie on his question, and she simply asks him, "Well, have you? Was you ever bit by a dead bee? Was you?" And Eddie relates that he's probably been stung that way 100 times, 100 or more times, and that they're a hazard when you're walking around barefoot, and that when they're dead, they can still sting you, and maybe if they're angry when they died, it hurts worse. So my thought was I could try to describe how bees can still tell some tales even after they're dead, and to also use that idea of we've changed, our media has changed about bees, but bees themselves have not changed. They still sting, they still have stripes, but those are also characteristics that could define wasps. Bees are unique in that among insects in that they gather pollen to feed their young, only pollen, right? Bees have not changed. We've changed, and bees changed so little that they can be recognized in the fossil record like 14 million years ago with more or less the same body parts, the same design. So the design of the bee body is conserved over time, even though the species kind of changed. The role and the shape and the size of bees has remained a constant as long as we've had flowers. So what are we trying to conserve when we think of saving the bees? A lot of people might be interested in these bad boys here. The domesticated honeybee, right? Which are an introduced species. Managed bees are probably not as harmful on the landscape as unmanaged bees, Africanized bees, and bees that might displace our native pollinators, our native bees from food and from nesting spaces. But 14 million years ago, there was a bee very much like that here on the Nevada landscape. And surprisingly, a fossil record in shale was found here in Nevada, which is kind of the only evidence that the same genus of honeybees was ever present in North America. The bees that tend to be preserved in fossil records are preserved in amber, and those are usually resin gathering bees that are attracted to amber and plant resins. And again, over 14 million years, even though they were wiped out on this continent because of climate change, we think, the general form, shape, body, the design of the bee remains the same. So even after they're no longer extant, if they've become extinct or populations have simply been eradicated from part of the landscape, you can still derive some information about bees and what they are, what they needed, how they lived from records they left or that records that people took of bees. So there are bee scientists who were not necessarily following along as mass media adopted the idea that bees needed to be saved, that bees were in decline. And at some point, bee scientists like Dave Goulson, he describes in this book, Silent Earth, Averting the Insect Apocalypse, doing some work with a group of, I don't know, amateurs, hobbyists, people who needed to turn data that they had gathered on the landscape in Germany into actual science. And they had a measure of just kind of the biomass, the total number and the weight of insects that they had collected in malaise traps at a number of national parks across Germany. And he realized about that time, when they finally got that article into publication in PLOS ONE, that there were no good metrics on actual bee declines, right? So I think I have a direct quote here someplace. So yeah, biologist Dave Goulson, UK's leading bumblebee researcher, wrote in his 2021 book, Silent Earth, Averting the Insect Apocalypse, that unfortunately there are no long-term data sets on the abundance of wild bee species. But their geographic distribution was well recorded by both scientists and amateurs in museum specimens. So in the UK, he's able to show that one of their largest and most charismatic bumblebee has been extirpated, has been eradicated, declined, disappeared from 95% of its traditional range in the UK, and only persists in a small area in Scotland. And that decline is very similar to the decline of the rusty-patched bumblebee. So in this country, the rusty-patched bumblebee became federally listed endangered species in 2017, and about that time, where I'm from, in Minnesota, it became a state bee, became kind of a cause for action and monitoring, and things like no mow May, and signs that say, don't spray pesticides or herbicides to protect the bees. And all those things are probably good, but scientists want to see more rigorous data that shows where the bees are, maybe what's causing their decline. So again, I'm going to try to divide that into two different kinds of science. One can be done by citizen scientists, volunteers on the landscape, where the bees are still alive, or where we think they might be, where people need to go out and try to do a rigorous survey method to count just how many bumblebees are in this football field shaped patch of roadside wildflowers, for example, in kind of designated grids, to try to get good coverage across the landscape and find out where maybe remnant populations of these rare bees still live. And that's kind of how I got involved, because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service kind of thought that the rusty-patched bumblebee might still be present on the landscape near where I'm from, in one of these grids that also included a massive Canadian tar sands pipeline expansion. And I had, in 2017, I had stumbled across a State Department scientist talking with two tribes about the possible impacts of the pipeline to rare species, to legally protected endangered species. And at that time, I think rusty-patched bumblebee was still just a proposed threatened or endangered species. In the end, its listing didn't preserve any habitat, but I was kind of hoping that if we could find it, it would create more leverage with the pipeline company to get them to do a better job of conserving plants. on that landscape. And I, with zest and fervor, spent a couple of seasons trying to document all the bumblebees, both in those specified survey methodologies that have been described by scientists like Dr. Jamie Strange, and as well as making just kind of random observations. And I've done that on an app called iNaturalist, and I think I've last I checked, I had taken around 400 discrete observations of ants, wasps, and bees in the United States. Right. So one bit I did manage to get out in my my 5-minute speech. This is obviously going longer than 5 minutes. Was that Dr. Jamie Strange wrote about one of the values of that kind of survey methodology is that you might be able to determine where invasive species, for example, escaped bumblebees from used in greenhouse crop pollination, have gotten established on the landscape and are maybe introducing new diseases or competing with rarer native bumblebees. So his study, published in October 2018, Ecology and Evolution, did describe a situation where they found a commonly reared and sold commercial bumblebee in an area where they didn't expect to find it. The other value is establishing the distribution and status of federally endangered species and candidate species under review. And I had hoped to get into kind of the division of labor and the amount of labor that would really be required to do a comprehensive bee survey across the United States. And those scientists like Dr. Jamie Strange, their time is very limited. They have obligations like teaching, running labs, administrative stuff. I believe he's also the chair of the entomology department at the Ohio State University, where he now runs the Bumblebee Health and Genetics Lab. So he described some shortfalls in his survey methodology that matter again in this landscape. I mentioned that that here in Nevada, a ancient, 14 million years ago, honeybee relative existed here. It's obviously long gone extinct. But he did describe doing some surveys in this Intermountain region, and limitations on his time meant that they didn't survey for his 2018 paper. They didn't survey higher elevation landscapes. And really that's where bumblebees and the kind of plants that you see in iNaturalist that would logically support bumblebee populations are found in the low desert. It's probably just too hot, too dry to support bumblebees. And I've spent about 3 years wandering around Nevada trying to take pictures of plants and bees, and haven't found a bumblebee yet here in Nevada. But I suspect that in the coming days and weeks, these cherry trees and similar landscapes with flowers on campus will produce for me. So we're at about the right elevation to find bumblebees here, and it's just kind of a waiting game. And obviously distractible drunks, old drunks like myself and Eddie, with persistent questions about bees. If we're given enough time, we eventually get to our point. If we're asked the right question in response, maybe we can have a profitable conversation, learn something from each other. But it seems to take about 15 minutes, not 5. And if it happens, like Murray, like Lauren Bacall's character, when you engage in that conversation with old drunks like myself, and our confused questions, recurring questions about bees, you only become more beautiful, more famous, more popular. It's a +10 bonus to your charisma. So absolutely do get famous and rich by humoring people like me and Eddie and our questions about dead and dying bees. Thank you. Bye.